So how did you make out with the exercise, writing tests for our form package? Hopefully you figured it out, and hopefully you found the errors, the couple of errors that I had hidden in there. If not, don't worry, we'll figure that out right now. So right now we have two tests. We have one for the valid function, test form valid, and one for the required function. And those, of course, correspond to these, the valid and the required. So those both work. I can open up a command prompt and make sure I'm in the right directory, and I am, and just write go test-v, and they both pass. Yes, they do. So let's write one for the next function. And the next function is has, and that's a really short function. That should be easy to test, so let's write a function for it, a test for it. Func test form has. And in there, we need to create a request, and we need to create a post form, a form with that request, which we did right up here in test form required, so we can do the same thing here. And then we need to actually call and test that function. So we can just say has, which will be a Boolean, is assign the value of form.has, and then it takes two parameters, the field, which can be anything, so whatever. One that I know doesn't exist is what I'm going to try right now. And we need to pass it our request. So when this is called, we're calling it with a request that we made here, and then we're adding to the form the post form values from that request, which are currently empty. And just so you know, we didn't have to create this request necessarily. Well, we did right now because we're passing a request to it. We are, but that's one of the problems. Here's one of our hidden errors. Let's see how this works. First of all, it's going to seem like it works. So I call this, I'm passing nothing in the post, so this field should not exist. Therefore, this should return false because it doesn't have it. So I just say if has, in other words, if it returns true, then write an error, t.error, and the message will be form shows has field when it does not. And so far, this seems okay. So we'll go run our tests, and it will pass, and it does, and that's correct. So now let's create another request and check the situation where we know we have posted values in there. So we already have a request. I don't need to recreate it. But what I can do is say, set up some values. So I'll say posted data, which will be a variable I create, posted data, is assigned the value of an empty URL.values. So that's the type. So it creates a variable of type URL values, which is what post form is. And it has nothing in it right now. So let's put something in it. Posted data.add. And we'll put a key of A and a value of A. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as I know it's in there. Then we need to reinitialize our form with our new request. So we can just say form equals new. And I could, again, assign this value to the request, R, as I did in previous examples, up here, for example. But I can also just pass in posted data itself, because that's of the correct type. So the only reason I created a request here was because when I call it, I have to pass in a request. Now watch what happens. I've now added the A parameter with the value of A to our posted data. So when I call, here's our second test in this test, has is equal to form.has, and I'll say A and the request. What I think I'm doing is passing it the correct information. Check this request for the existence of a field named A in the post request. So I should be able to say if it doesn't have it, if has is false, then write an error. t.error. We can say shows form does not have field when it should. Now so far, this seems to make perfect sense. So let's go back and run our test. Go test-v. And it fails. It says shows form does not have field when it should. So that test we just wrote seems to fail. And that appears to make no sense whatsoever, because I took this, I created my posted data, I put the value in there, it's named A, I reinitialized my form variable and passed it the posted data, so this should pass. So let's go look at the function and see what the problem is. And the problem is right here. When I actually check, it's this line, and line 42 in my code. I'm saying go to the request that you passed me, look at the form on that request, and check for the existence of the field named whatever this is, whatever the first value is. So when we call this, I'm passing, in our test, I'm passing an A here, and I'm passing that request we manually created right in our test. That's the request I'm checking. What we should be checking is this one in the receiver. That's why we have this line right here, form equals new posted data. When I call form, I'm actually looking at the request associated with the form. And this is utterly unnecessary. We're not doing anything with it. And in fact, we can and will eventually get rid of it. So to make this test work properly, what I need to do is fix this line and not check on r.form. Instead, I should be checking f, the value from our receiver. Check that. And now this isn't even being used. I'm not going to delete it right now, but I will a little bit later on when we actually run the application, because now it's a totally unnecessary request. So I can go back now that I've fixed this line, go back to my command prompt and run the test again. And it passes. And that is one of the hidden errors. So that's the test for our has function. What's our next function? Let's go back here and have a look. The next one is min length. So let's check that one. We'll create a test for min length. Func test form min length. And what do we want to do here? Well, if we look at the function again, min length appears to take this first parameter, which is our field name we're checking. The second one is an int, and the third one is the request. And as you can see, here's our second error. Right away, I know, because I just fixed it up here, that this is checking the wrong parameter. It's checking the request from here, when it should be checking the request that's actually associated with our receiver. So I'll just copy this and replace this. And again, that means this parameter is no longer required, and there's no point in having parameters in functions that we never ever use, so we'll get rid of that in a bit. But first of all, let's get the test passing. So we can use exactly the same logic. And now that I know I don't need a request, well, actually at the moment I do, so I'll create a request here, but we'll get rid of that momentarily. Okay, so we're just building a request we're not even going to use. I can create a new form using this request we just built, and we will write our first test. And our first test is we'll make sure that min length doesn't work for a non-existent field. Okay? So in other words, I'm going to just do a really simple thing. Form.minLength, I'll call that, and I'll call it with a field I know does not exist, and no fields exist in the post data right now, and give it some length, and then the request. And we'll write the test. If form.valid, in other words, this should be set to false. Right now, I know that the form valid should return false because it's checking the length of a non-existent field. Then I need to throw an error. T.error shows min length. Let's say form shows. Form shows min length for non-existent field. Okay, so let's run that test. See what happens. And it passed. So this time we'll create a posted values again, just like we did above. Posted values is assigned an empty URL.values. And then we'll add a field to it. So we'll say posted values dot add, and we'll call our field some field. And we'll give it a value of some value. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 characters long. Okay, so now we can write our test. So we can just easily say form equals new, and it'll be posted values. So that creates a new form, and it passes it this information for the form values. So it passes in one parameter with the name of some field and the value of some value. And now we have a form that has some data we can test. So let's test it. And we'll say form.minLength, and the field name is some field. The length we'll put at 100, so we know that it's not going to be long enough, and we'll pass in that request that we're not doing anything with, which we'll have to get rid of eventually. And now we can just say if form.valid, if it shows the form is valid, that fails the test because we know that some value is less than 100 characters long. So we'll say t.error shows min length of 100 met when data is shorter. All right, let's test that. Go test-v, and it passes. So now we need to test the other case. Create posted values. Posted values. We're not going to create it. We're going to reinitialize it. Posted values is equal to url.values. All right, so that reinitializes our posted values to be empty. And now we'll add a value to it. Posted values.add, and we'll call this one another field. And we'll give it the length of ABC 1, 2, 3. Something greater than 1. We'll just test for a min length of 1. Now we have to reinitialize our form. Form equals new, and we'll pass in our posted values. And now we call min length. Form.min length, and our field is another field. Our min length will be 1, so we know that what we're passing in is longer than 1 character, and we'll pass it that request, which we're not actually using at the moment, but we'll take care of that shortly. And now this should pass validation. So we need to test that if it doesn't pass validation. If not form.valid, then fail the test. T.error shows min length of 1 is not met when it is. All right, let's go back and run our tests. So go test-v, and everything passes. Perfect. All right. So far, so good. Do we have anything left to test? Is email. That's our last one. Well, that one should be pretty easy too. Let's write that test. So we'll write a new function. Func test form is email. And we need to, as we've done right along, we'll create our form request and our form. And we will look at the isEmail function. So what does that require? That requires just a field name. That's easy enough. Form.isEmail with a non-existent field. X doesn't exist. And then we just check to see if the form is valid. If form.valid t.error. It can't be valid because we passed it no value whatsoever. And the error should just say something like form shows valid email for non-existent field. Okay, so let's run that test. Go test-v. Perfect. So now let's try passing in a valid email. So we'll just, again, as we've done right along, posted values, we'll create that variable, is assign the value of an empty url.values. And then we'll add a value to it. Posted values.add, and we'll call it email. And we'll give it a valid email address. So a valid email address could be something as simple as me@here.com. Okay, and we need to reinitialize our form. So form equals new, and we'll just put in our posted values. And then finally, we'll call it the test again. Form.isEmail. And the value where we want to check is email. And that's all we have to do. And then we check to see if we get it. Now, we should be getting a valid form now, right? Because we've passed it a field named email with something that's in the form of an email address. So we need to check if the form is not valid. If not, form.valid, t.error, and the error would be got an invalid email when we should not have. All right, let's run that test. Clear the screen, run the test, and it passes. Perfect. All right. Anything else we should be testing here? We should be testing passing an invalid email address. And what we can do is just copy this entire section, paste it here, and modify it. So posted values is now equal to URL values. And posted values will add an email, but we'll just put X in there, which we know is not an email address. And then we reinitialize our form. We check it for the field named email, which currently has the value of X. And if the form is valid this time, got valid for invalid email address. And I can just delete the rest of this. And that should work. So let's run our tests. And everything passed. Good. Now, there's a couple of things we can do here that actually will make this a little bit cleaner. So we've passed all of our tests, and we'll check our coverage in a minute. But right away, we don't need this request. Creating this request is utterly useless. All we need to do is to create a URL values. So what I'm going to do is copy this and replace this line with that, and then change this to an equals, not an assign. And up here, I'll just pass in posted values. Because really, when you think about it, this new function requires URL values. That's what it requires. It doesn't require a request. So we were creating a request for no point whatsoever. Now up here, when we thought things were working properly with the has, we were creating a request as well. So what we were doing that because we thought we had to pass request as a parameter. So let's fix that right now. Let's get rid of the request for the has, this parameter in the has function. So that is gone. And we'll go back to forms test. We don't need this request anymore, and we don't need this request anymore. And now we should be able to run those tests and still have them pass. Go test that. So it all worked just fine. Great. In the same way, when we call min length, we don't need that request there anymore. So let's get rid of that and get rid of it right here. And I think that's it for that one. So we can go back here and remove this parameter, which is pointless and serves no purpose whatsoever, and see if we have everything working. Oh, one more down here. Get rid of that one. So we should be able to pass those tests again. And we do. That's great. Okay, now the last thing I need to check before I can actually say that this part is done is to make sure, now that I've changed that function, does our program still compile? So I'll go back to my terminal window, clear the screen. Actually, I'll open a new tab just so I don't have to find this folder again. And go to my Golang projects and my bookings, and I will run this. So remember, running this now isn't as easy as going go run command web star.go. That'll fail because there's test files in there. So we actually have to specify the three files that are in there that are not test files. Main.go and command web roots.go and command web middleware.go. And hopefully it'll run. And it fails. And it fails at handlers go line 87. And that's why I'm checking this. So let's go fix that right now. Handlers go line 87 right here. So let's get rid of that. We no longer want the request in there. And now we'll try running the program again. So I'll just hit the up arrow to get the command back. And it runs. All right. So now I'm going to go back to my other terminal window, which is in the correct directory. Let's check our coverage on this and see if we have everything we want covered in the forms package. Go test-cover. And it says 81.8%. Well, I thought I tested everything. Well, let's find out what we didn't test. So I'm going to use my shorthand coverage, my little alias. And you might have to type the command all the way out. But let's see what we have here. So right in forms.go, at no point did I try the get function. Well, I'm going to have to do that. That should be pretty easy. But the other one has 100% coverage, which is perfect. All right, so how do I check the get function? Well, that's really easy. So what I'm going to do is close this and go back to my tests under form tests. And right here, when I say, for example, I just need to check it in one spot, and then I know that it works. So we need to find somewhere where I can call the get function and get no error. And then I need to find somewhere where I can call the get function and get an error. So how am I going to do this? Right away, if this one, if it shows the form is valid, if this test fails, well, after that, I know that there should be an error in there. So I can just say, and I'll just store the values. So I'll call it X. Now I'll call it is error. Is assigned the value of form.errors.get, and then the field name I used up here, which is X. And then I just need to make sure that there is there is an error. So I'll say if X is equal to nothing, because in the get function, which is right over in our errors file, I believe, right here, in the get function, it returns an empty string if there is no error. Otherwise, it returns the error. And I need to check both of these conditions. So in the first case, where I'm expecting an error to be there, so if is error not x, is error not x. If is error is an empty string, that didn't work. So I need to throw an error. T.error. And I should just say something like should have an error, but did not get one. Okay, and now I need to use the same logic, so I'll just copy this. When there is no error, okay, so when do I know there is no error? If the form is valid, is this the case? No, I'm not going to, so it shows min length of 100 when data is shorter. So I need to check when there is no error. And, oh, here we are. So if the form is not valid. So after this test, when I'm passing it another field and checking for a min length of 1, I know this test should pass. Therefore, there should be no error. So I can just paste what I had there, change this to an equals, because I can't reinitialize or redeclare the variable twice in the same block. And I'm going to look for the field not called x, but the field called another field. So, and now I say if error is equal to nothing, if error is not equal to nothing, should not have an error, but got one. And that should do it. So let's just look at this again. In the first case, up here, I'm calling with an empty post form. There's nothing in there whatsoever. So I know there should be an error. And I check to say, if there's no error for the field x, then write an error, fail the test. Down here, when I know I'm calling a valid request and my form should be valid, this, what I call form errors get on another field, which is the field I just tested right here, then I should have an error. So I should not have an error. So I say if error is not equal to an empty string, then I write fail my test and write the appropriate error message. So let's test this. Go back to our web browser and run our test. Everything passed. Now let's check our coverage. I have 100% coverage for errors.go and I have 100% coverage for forms.go. And that is exactly what I wanted. All right, that is the last bit we need to do for this particular package. So let's move on.